Welcome, dear listeners, to a journey through time, where the threads of destiny intertwine amidst the mists of Elizabethan England. In an era of palace intrigues and hearts imprisoned by duty, we shall discover that true love can flourish even in the most arid soils of obligation. This is the story of Catherine Fairfax and Lord William Ashford, two souls destined to meet amid the political storms of 1587, when the Spanish threat hung over England like an ominous shadow. Leave your comment and share your city with us. If this narrative touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. It helps us continue bringing these exciting journeys through the centuries. London, England, year 1587, a time of uncertainties, where Queen Elizabeth I ruled with an iron fist over a kingdom threatened by winds of war blowing from Spain. The parchment trembled between Sir Thomas Fairfax's calloused fingers like an autumn leaf about to detach from its branch. From where are you watching this story? The royal seal, with its golden lion on red wax, gleamed under the hesitant candlelight that slowly consumed itself on the oak table. Catherine watched her father through the crack of the half-open door, her delicate fingers gripping the folds of her linen skirt like someone holding on to the last thread of hope. The Fairfax house, situated on the outskirts of Westminster, breathed the aroma of beeswax mixed with the melancholic perfume of violets that her mother had cultivated in the small garden before succumbing to the fevers that had kept her bedridden for weeks. The tick-tock of the Dutch clock echoed through the narrow corridors like the beats of an anxious heart, marking the rhythm of a life balanced on a razor's edge. Sir Thomas raised his eyes from the parchment, and Catherine saw in them something she had never witnessed before, the moist gleam of fear. The words of the royal letter danced before his eyes like poisonous serpents. Correspondence with Scottish Catholic sympathizers, Jesuit conspirators, treason against the crown. Each syllable was a blade cutting through the certainties of a life built with sweat and honesty in the textile trade. The November wind beat against the small window panes, bringing with it the scent of imminent rain and the distant murmur of the Thames. Catherine pulled her wool shawl over her shoulders, but the cold that ran through her didn't come from the weather. It was born from the premonition that this letter would forever seal her family's fate. "Catherine," her father's voice cut through the silence like a sharp blade. "Come in, my daughter." She obeyed with cautious steps, her bare feet on the worn floorboards. Sir Thomas carefully folded the parchment and stored it in the iron drawer that he locked with a golden key. "Father, what news does the crown bring?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His eyes met hers, and Catherine read there the entire storm that would befall their lives. Sir Thomas took his daughter's hands between his own, rough from work, but tender as farewell caresses. "My child," he hesitated, like someone searching for words to explain the inexplicable. "Sometimes fate presents us with choices that are not truly choices." The silence that followed was interrupted only by the creaking of the house's old wood and the whispers of rain beginning to fall. Catherine felt that something precious was about to be torn from her, like a flower picked before its time. How could a 19-year-old young woman imagine that this night would forever change the course of her existence? St. Margaret's Chapel rose like a stone ghost among the morning mists of December. Its Gothic-stained glass filtered the pale light of the English winter, creating faded color mosaics over the altar where Catherine waited, motionless as a marble statue. The blue-grey silk dress, borrowed from a distant cousin, hung over her slender body without the slightest trace of bridal joy. There was no music, no flowers, no lace veil embroidered by a mother's loving hands, only the echo of Reverend Phillips's footsteps on the cold flagstones and the distant murmur of morning prayers echoing through the corridors of Whitehall Palace. Catherine kept her gaze fixed on the golden cross that crowned the altar, her fingers intertwined so tightly that her knuckles had lost their color. The scent of incense mixed with the smell of damp stone and ancient parchments, creating an atmosphere that resembled a funeral more than a wedding. The sound of firm footsteps echoed through the side naves. Catherine didn't need to turn to know that Lord William Ashford had just entered the chapel. His presence filled the space like a dense shadow, carrying with it the aroma of fine leather and the subtle scent of sandalwood emanating from his clothes. When she finally turned, her eyes met a figure that could have been sculpted by Renaissance masters. Tall with broad shoulders wrapped in a black velvet doublet, cape lined with dark fur over his shoulders. His angular face, with well-defined aristocratic features, remained impassive as a theatre mask. Only his eyes, of a stormy grey that reminded one of the sky before a tempest, revealed any vestige of humanity behind that icy facade. He approached without haste, without smiling, without offering any gesture of courtesy or affection. He positioned himself beside her before the altar, like someone fulfilling military protocol, his gloved hands crossed behind his back. Reverend Phillips opened the prayer book with trembling fingers, his words echoing through the empty space. "We are gathered here before God to unite in holy matrimony, William Edgar Ashford, Lord of Ashford, Knight of the Order of the Garter, and Katherine Margaret Fairfax." The words were lost in Catherine's mind like raindrops on glass. She repeated the vows without feeling, the syllables escaping her lips like involuntary sighs. When the moment came for the exchange of rings, William removed from the inner pocket of his doublet a small ring of white gold, simple and cold as winter ice. He slipped the wedding ring onto her ring finger, without raising his eyes, without a smile, without even squeezing her hand. The cold metal against her skin was like the final seal of a destiny she had never chosen. "You may kiss the bride," announced the Reverend. William inclined slightly. His lips brushed Catherine's forehead in a chaste and distant kiss like a spring breeze. There was no passion, no tenderness, only the formal fulfillment of a ritual. When they moved away from the altar, William didn't offer his arm to his wife. He walked a few steps ahead, his cape fluttering behind him like a raven's wings. Katherine followed him in silence, her leather shoes beating against the flagstones in a solitary melody. Outside the chapel, a dark wooden carriage awaited them. The Ashford coat of arms, a golden griffin on a blue field, decorated the lacquered doors. William climbed first and extended his hand to help her, the first minimally courteous gesture of that entire morning. During the entire journey to Ashford Manor, no words were exchanged. Katherine observed through the small window the landscapes that succeeded each other, London's pointed rooftops giving way to the green fields south of the Thames, the winter-bare trees swaying like dancing skeletons in the wind. What secrets were hidden behind the silence of this man who was now her husband? Ashford Manor rose against the leaden sky like a medieval fortress forgotten by time. Its dark grey stone towers cut the horizon in a silhouette that inspired more fear than admiration, while its Gothic windows seemed like empty eyes watching the arrival of the new occupants. Climbing ivy embraced the exterior walls like skeletal fingers, whispering ancient secrets to the wind blowing from the Thames. Katherine descended from the carriage, stepping onto gravel that crunched under her feet like crushed bones. The air carried the aroma of damp stone, moss, and something indefinable that reminded one of memories asleep in dusty trunks. The gargoyles sculpted in the corners of the roof seemed to smile with malice, as if they knew all the secrets of that house and amused themselves with them. The main door, a masterpiece of dark oak carved with heraldic motifs, opened before they even approached. An elderly woman with greying hair tied in a severe bun and impeccably white aprons bowed in respectful reverence. "Mrs. Thornton," said William, addressing the housekeeper, "I present to you Lady Katherine Ashford." The woman raised her eyes, and Katherine saw in them a mixture of curiosity and compassion that made her feel even more displaced. "Milady," murmured Mrs. Thornton. "Welcome to Ashford Manor." The entrance hall was vast as a cathedral, with a vaulted ceiling decorated by carved oak beams. Ancient tapestries covered the walls, depicting hunting scenes and medieval battles in tones faded by time. A double marble staircase curved elegantly toward the upper floor, its wrought iron railings worked with leaf and flower motifs. "Mrs. Thornton will take care of your establishment," said William, without looking directly at Katherine. "You have freedom to organize the spaces according to your will, except the north wing. There are my private archives and navigation maps." Katherine nodded in silence, her eyes roaming the decoration details, the crystal chandeliers hanging like frozen tears, the portraits of Ashford ancestors watching her with solemn expressions, the immense fireplace where only a few embers fought against the cold. "I expect from you only," continued William, his voice echoing through the hall, "the composure adequate to a lady. Nothing more." The words fell upon Katherine like drops of icy rain. She nodded again, without finding words to respond to such coldness. Mrs. Thornton led her through the extensive corridors, pointing out the location of the library, the music room, the inner gardens. Finally, they stopped before a light oak door decorated with carvings of roses and vine leaves. "These will be your chambers, milady," said the housekeeper, opening the door. "They belong to the First Lady Ashford." The room was spacious and elegant, decorated in shades of light blue and gold. A canopy bed occupied the center, its embroidered silk curtains swaying gently with the air current. Near the window, a light wooden writing desk waited, with letter paper and inkwell arranged with precision. "Lady Anne?" murmured Catherine, lightly touching the embroidered bedspread. "Yes, milady. A lady of great beauty and gentleness," responded Mrs. Thornton, but something in her voice suggested there was much more to be said about William's first wife. When she was alone, Catherine approached the window that overlooked the gardens. Down below, she saw William walking along the stone paths between the winter's dormant flower beds. His strides were long and decided, but there was something in his posture that suggested the weight of invisible burdens. She opened the wardrobe and found some dresses that had belonged to Lady Anne, all in fine fabrics and soft colors. At the bottom of the writing desk drawer, her fingers found something unexpected, a folded letter, yellowed by time. With trembling hands, she unfolded the paper and read the words written in feminine and delicate calligraphy. "You promised to keep silence, even after my death. You must protect him, William, even if it means losing everything you love most. The secrets we carry are too heavy for a single soul." The letter wasn't signed, but Catherine instinctively knew it had been written by Lady Anne. What secrets had weighed so heavily upon that house? What silence did William guard with such zeal? The wind beat against the window, and Catherine had the strange sensation that the walls around her whispered stories she wasn't yet ready to understand. What mysteries slept among those centuries-old stones? The Ashford Manor Library was a sanctuary of knowledge that extended through 2 entire wings of the first floor. Dark oak shelves rose to the vaulted ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes that exhaled the sweet and nostalgic perfume of aged paper and dried ink. Rays of sunlight filtered through colored glass panes created luminous patterns over the reading tables, where ancient terrestrial globes and navigation instruments rested like explorers' treasures. Catherine had discovered this refuge 3 days after her arrival, when the solitude of empty corridors became unbearable. William spent most of his time in the North Wing, territory forbidden to her, emerging only for meals, which they consumed in sepulchral silence. Her attempts to initiate conversations always crashed against the wall of ice he had erected around himself. That January morning, while leafing through a volume of Edmund Spenser's poetry, Catherine found between the pages a folded paper that made her heart race. It was another letter in the same delicate calligraphy she had discovered in her chambers. "My beloved William, I know you promised to keep silence about my acts, even after my death. But the weight of this truth must not fall only upon your shoulders. You must protect him, even if it means losing everything you love most. The secrets we carry are too heavy for a single soul. If someday a new lady comes to inhabit these halls, show her the same mercy you showed me. True love resides in protecting those we love, not in possessing them. Forever yours, Anne." Catherine's hands trembled as she refolded the letter. Lady Anne had left clues scattered throughout the house like breadcrumbs for whoever came after her. But what terrible secret had she taken with her to the grave? The sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor. Catherine quickly hid the letter between the book's pages and pretended to be absorbed in reading when William appeared at the library entrance. He wore a dark green wool doublet and tight leather breeches, his hair slightly disheveled as if he had been riding. "Lady Catherine," he said, his voice formal as always, "I hope you are finding adequate occupation." "The library is magnificent," she replied, raising her eyes from the book. Lady Anne had excellent taste for literature. Something passed through William's grey eyes upon hearing his first wife's name. For a moment, his mask of coldness seemed to waver, revealing a deep and ancient pain. "Anne. Yes. She loved books," he murmured, approaching one of the shelves. "She spent hours here, reading about distant lands and maritime adventures. She must have been an extraordinary woman," said Catherine softly. William stopped before a silver-framed portrait that Catherine hadn't noticed before. The painting showed a young woman of ethereal beauty, hair golden as ripe wheat and eyes blue as summer sky. She wore a sea-green silk dress and smiled with a sweetness that contrasted dramatically with the melancholic atmosphere of the house. "She was," said William, his voice laden with a sadness that seemed to spring from the depths of his soul, "and she paid dearly for her kindness." Before Katherine could ask what he meant, William moved away from the portrait and headed for the exit. He stopped at the door without turning. "If you find anything, any paper or personal object of Anne's, bring it to me, please. There are certain memories that are better left in peace." After he left, Katherine remained alone among the books, her heart beating irregularly. She knew she should give him the letter she had found, but something held her back. An inner voice whispered that Lady Anne had left those messages for a specific reason, and that she, Katherine, needed to discover the whole truth before revealing anything. That afternoon, while walking through the winter's dormant gardens, Katherine found Mrs. Thornton gathering dried herbs in the small medicinal garden. "Mrs. Thornton," she said hesitantly, "can you tell me about Lady Anne?" The housekeeper raised her eyes, studying Katherine's face carefully. "She was a gentle and kind lady, milady, but—" She hesitated, looking around as if fearing to be heard. "But what?" "There were things she shouldn't have gotten involved with. Lord William did everything to protect her, but sometimes love isn't enough to save someone from their own choices." Before Katherine could ask more questions, Mrs. Thornton moved away, leaving her alone with more mysteries than answers. That night, upon returning to her chambers, Katherine found a note under her door. The handwriting was different, masculine and angular. "He who protected your father can destroy him if you break the oath. Some truths are too dangerous to be discovered." What dark forces moved in the shadows of that apparent tranquility? The Whitehall gardens sparkled under February's weak sun, like jewels set in green velvet. The perfectly trimmed topiaries formed geometric labyrinths where court ladies strolled, displaying their brocade dresses and gleaming jewels. The cold air carried the perfume of roses preserved in dried petals, and the musical murmur of conversations floating like gentle melodies among the boxwood alleys. Katherine walked beside William along the gravel paths, her silk shoes producing an almost inaudible sound on the small stones. She wore a new dress of navy blue velvet, embroidered with silver threads, a concession from William so she wouldn't be embarrassed before the nobility. Still, she felt like a black swan among the court's golden peacocks. Queen Elizabeth's soiree took place in the gardens to celebrate the arrival of French ambassadors. Tables covered with fine linen tablecloths displayed exquisite delicacies, roasted swans decorated with their own feathers, meat pies seasoned with oriental spices, sweets molded in flower and fruit shapes, and crystallized fruits that gleamed like precious stones. "Lady Katherine," a melodious but venomous voice cut through the air. She turned to find Lady Beatrice Pemberton approaching with a smile that didn't reach her brown eyes. Beatrice was the personification of English aristocratic beauty, tall, with hair red as fire and porcelain skin that had never known work. Her golden silk dress cost more than many families' annual income, and the pearls around her neck were the size of ripe cherries. "Lady Beatrice," responded Katherine with an educated curtsy. "What joy to see you in Her Majesty's gardens," said Beatrice, her eyes scanning Katherine's dress with poorly disguised disdain. "Your simplicity is refreshing, considering your origin." The blow was subtle but accurate. Katherine felt her cheeks flush but maintained her composure. "I thank you for your kind words," she said, her voice firm despite the embarrassment. Lady Beatrice moved closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that other ladies could hear. "They tell me your marriage to Lord Ashford was quite practical. What a beautiful demonstration of how commerce can elevate itself through convenient alliances." The words hit Katherine like lashes. She noticed that other ladies had approached, forming a semicircle around them like vultures scenting carrion. Their gazes varied between malicious curiosity and feigned compassion. "Marriage is always a union of multiple interests," responded Katherine, searching for William with her eyes. He was conversing with a group of lords about 20 paces ahead, oblivious to what was happening. "Oh, certainly," continued Beatrice, her voice gaining an even more venomous tone. "But some unions are born from mutual affection, while others are born from the need to save tarnished reputations." The circle of ladies whispered among themselves like buzzing wasps. Katherine felt the world spinning around her, but forced herself to maintain dignity. At that moment, music began to play, an elegant pavane that invited couples to dance. It was tradition for consorts to dance together to the first music of the soirée, a public demonstration of conjugal harmony. "Oh, what delight!" exclaimed Lady Beatrice, clapping. "The consort's pavane. Lord Ashford will certainly come fetch you for the dance." All the ladies turned expectantly toward William. Katherine watched him raise his head at the sound of the music, his eyes meeting hers across the distance. For a moment that lasted an eternity, she believed he would come, that he would cross the garden, offer his arm, and lead her to the dance like a devoted husband. But William merely observed her with an unchangeable expression, made a slight nod, a cold and distant greeting, and turned to continue his conversation with the lords. The silence that followed was deafening. Katherine felt all faces turn toward her, all mouths curve in malicious smiles. Humiliation descended upon her like icy rain, soaking her to the bone. "How peculiar," murmured Lady Beatrice, making sure her voice echoed. "Perhaps Lord Ashford is too occupied with state affairs to remember conjugal duties." The other lady's giggles sounded like funeral bells in Katherine's ears. She kept her chin up, but inside felt herself crumbling like a sandcastle under the tide. "If you'll excuse me," she said with all the dignity she could muster, "I believe the fresh air will do me good." She moved away from the group toward the boxwood labyrinth, her eyes burning with unshed tears. Behind her she could hear whispers spreading like fire in dry straw. Marriage of convenience, commercial origin, husband who despises her. In the heart of the labyrinth, far from curious gazes, Katherine finally allowed tears to flow. She didn't cry for the lost dance or public humiliation. She cried for the profound loneliness of a marriage that was merely a golden prison, where two souls shared the same roof but lived in completely separate worlds. What secrets of William could justify such coldness? The carriage cut through the darkness of rural roads like a ghost ship navigating seas of mist. The silence inside the compartment was so thick that Katherine could hear every breath from William, every creak of wheels on gravel, every beat of her own heart still accelerated by the humiliation suffered at the soirée. William remained seated in the opposite corner, his face turned toward the small window, through which only shadows of bare trees swaying in the night wind could be glimpsed. His gloved hands rested on his knees, in absolute control, that contrasted with the storm of emotions Katherine felt swirling between them. Ashford Manor finally appeared in the distance, its dark towers silhouetted against the starry sky like a giant's fingers pointing toward the constellations. The windows, illuminated by candles, seemed like golden eyes watching the Lord's return, but there was no warmth in those lights, only the cold duty of hospitality. Mrs. Thornton waited in the entrance hall, ready to collect capes and gloves. She discreetly observed Katherine's tense expression and William's closed countenance, but asked no questions. Having served the Ashford family for decades, she had learned that some storms needed to pass alone. "Good night, Mrs. Thornton," murmured Katherine, handing her the embroidered cape. "Good night, milady. I left hot tea in your chambers." Katherine headed for the stairway, but William's voice stopped her. "Lady Katherine." She turned, finding him standing in the center of the hall, hands crossed behind his back in a military posture that had become his signature. "Yes, my lord?" "Accompany me to the office. There are matters we need to discuss." William's office was in the West Wing, a masculine environment decorated with ancient maps, terrestrial globes, and shelves filled with naval treaties. A fireplace crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the dark wood-paneled walls. The aroma of leather, ink, and candle wax created an atmosphere of academic seclusion. William served himself a glass of red wine from a bottle resting on the table, but offered nothing to Katherine. She remained standing before the fireplace, hands intertwined over her skirt, awaiting words she intuited would be important. "What happened today in the gardens?" he began, without looking at her directly. "I regret that you were exposed to such embarrassments." "They were just words, my lord," responded Katherine, though she still felt the sting of humiliation. "No," said William, finally turning toward her. "They were much more than words. They were sharp blades wielded by someone who knows exactly where to cut deepest." He approached the window overlooking the gardens, plunged in darkness. The full moon's light bathed his angular profile, creating dramatic contrasts between light and shadow. "Lady Beatrice Pemberton," he continued, his voice laden with ancient disgust, "is a serpent that feeds on others' poison. She knows things about my past that she preferred to use against you today." Katherine took a step in his direction. "What things, William?" It was the first time she had used only his name without the formal title. Something in that intimate tone seemed to break a barrier between them. William drank a sip of wine before responding, as if he needed liquid courage for the words that would come. "I never desired this marriage," he said, the words coming slow and heavy. "Neither marriage nor court exposure nor this." He gestured vaguely in her direction, and Katherine felt her heart tighten. "Then why did you accept?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. William turned to face her, and for the first time since they had met, Katherine saw beyond the mask of coldness. She saw pain, exhaustion, and something that looked dangerously like remorse. "Because not protecting you," he hesitated as if struggling against the words, "would have been a worse fate." "Protecting me? From what?" "From me," he replied simply, "from my reputation, from the ghosts I carry." The silence that followed was filled only by the crackling of wood in the fireplace and the distant tick-tock of the clock in the corridor. Katherine felt they were on the threshold of something important, of a truth that had remained buried too long. "I don't understand you," she said finally. William finished his wine in one gulp and placed the glass on the table with a sound that echoed through the environment. "And it's better that way," he murmured. "There are truths that are too heavy to be shared." He passed by her toward the door, but Katherine extended her hand, lightly touching his arm. The contact was brief, but sent an electric current through both. "William," she said, her voice soft as velvet, "whatever happened in the past, you don't need to carry that burden alone." For a moment his grey eyes softened. For a moment, Katherine glimpsed the man who existed behind the ice armor. "Good night, Katherine," he said, using only her name for the first time. And then he was gone, leaving her alone with the echo of his voice and the certainty that something had changed between them that night. What ghosts from the past haunted that apparently impenetrable man? Lady Beatrice Pemberton's tea salon was an altar dedicated to ostentation, walls covered in French silk in pink and gold tones, furniture carved by master artisans, and a table set with china porcelain worth more than many young women's dowries. The perfume of jasmine and bergamot mixed with the aroma of freshly baked cakes, creating an atmosphere of refinement that perfectly masked its hostess's venomous intentions. Katherine had accepted the invitation against her better judgment, driven by a curiosity that had grown like poisonous ivy since William's veiled confession night. 3 weeks had passed since the Whitehall soiree, and the relationship between her and her husband had assumed a different tone, still distant, but with less ice and more possibility. "Dear Katherine," purred Lady Beatrice, serving tea in delicate cups decorated with hand-painted roses. "What joy to have you in my house. I was anxious for a more intimate conversation." The salon was discreetly empty of other ladies, a detail that didn't escape Katherine's notice. Lady Beatrice had orchestrated this meeting with the precision of a general planning a battle. "You are very kind, Lady Beatrice," responded Katherine, accepting the cup and trying to maintain a polite smile. "Oh, please, let us dispense with formalities," said Beatrice, settling in the velvet armchair like a cat that had just spotted a mouse. "After all, we are both wives of lords with interesting histories." Katherine sipped her tea, savouring the aromatic mixture while awaiting the true reason for this invitation. "You know," continued Beatrice, her brown eyes gleaming with poorly disguised malice, "sometimes I wonder if you truly understand whom you married." "How so?" Beatrice leaned closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "William Ashford carries secrets that could bring down kingdoms, my dear. Secrets that cost his first wife's life." Katherine's heart raced, but she forced herself to maintain composure. "Lady Anne died of fevers, as I was told." "Fevers?" Beatrice laughed, a crystalline and cruel sound. "Oh, my innocent child. Lady Anne died of a broken heart and guilty conscience." Katherine set down her cup with trembling hands. "I don't understand you." Beatrice rose and went to a delicate writing desk, from which she retrieved a leather folder yellowed by time. She returned to her place with a triumphant smile. "Lady Anne Ashford," she said, opening the folder, "was a traitor to the English crown." The documents that Beatrice spread on the low table were copies of letters, espionage reports, and maps marked with strange symbols. Katherine immediately recognized Lady Anne's delicate handwriting. "For 2 years," continued Beatrice, delighting in every word, "your husband's first wife maintained secret correspondence with an emissary of King Philip II of Spain. She passed information about our naval defense, about preparations against the Spanish Armada, about trade routes and weak points of our ports." Katherine observed the letters with growing horror. One was addressed to His Excellency Don Carlos de Mendoza and detailed the location of English warships anchored in Portsmouth. This cannot be true," she murmured. "Oh, but it is most true," replied Beatrice. "And you know what's even more fascinating? Lord William discovered his wife's treason 6 months before she died." The world seemed to tilt under Katherine's feet. "And what did he do?" "Nothing," said Beatrice, savouring each syllable. "Absolutely nothing. He didn't denounce her to Queen Elizabeth, didn't expose her to intelligence services, took no action that a loyal subject should take. Why? Because he loved her." Beatrice smiled like a viper about to deliver the final strike. "He loved her so much that he was willing to betray his own homeland to protect her. He lied to the Queen, forged documents, diverted investigations. He became an accomplice to treason for love." Katherine felt as if she were sinking in quicksand. Each revelation pulled her deeper into an abyss of understanding. "And when Lady Anne finally died," continued Beatrice, "William inherited not only her guilt, but also her debt to Spanish spies. For all these years, he has been paying with information and favors to maintain silence about the scandal. This is impossible." "It's the truth," said Beatrice, collecting the documents. "And now you understand why your marriage was so convenient for him. An innocent wife of humble origin, without court connections that could ask inconvenient questions. A perfect facade of respectability." Katherine rose abruptly, her mind spinning like a mill wheel. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you are young and deserve to know the truth about the man with whom you share your bed," responded Beatrice, but her eyes revealed less noble motives. "And because when the time comes, perhaps you can make the right choice." "What choice?" Lady Beatrice approached her, lips curved in a smile that had nothing maternal about it. "Between loyalty to a traitor and loyalty to your homeland, dear. Between blind love and justice." Katherine left Lady Beatrice's house like a sleepwalker, the revelations echoing in her mind like funeral bells. During the entire journey back to Ashford Manor, she struggled to organize her thoughts, to separate truth from malice, to understand the man she had married. When she arrived home, she found William in his office, bent over maps and documents. For the first time, she observed him with new eyes, and saw in the tension lines around his eyes, in the rigidity of his shoulders, in the weight he seemed to carry like Atlas carried the world. Was William truly the traitor that Beatrice had painted, or were there even deeper truths hidden in that web of secrets? The March rain beat against William's office windows like impatient fingers drumming on crystal. The hypnotic sound mixed with the crackling of wood in the fireplace, creating a melancholic symphony that echoed Katherine's state of mind as she stood before the half-open door, watching her husband work. 3 days had passed since her conversation with Lady Beatrice. 3 days during which Katherine had wrestled with the revelations like Jacob wrestled with the angel. Every glance cast at William, every gesture of his, every word exchanged between them had gained new layers of meaning. She now saw the weight he carried on his shoulders, the constant tension in his jaw, the way his eyes diverted when she tried to read them. William was bent over a table covered with naval maps, a goose quill in his right hand occasionally dripping ink onto the vellum paper. Melted tallow candles formed small golden lakes on the silver candlesticks, casting dancing shadows over his concentrated face. He had dispensed with his formal doublet and worked only in his white linen shirt, sleeves rolled up, revealing muscular forearms marked by small scars. Witnesses to a life Katherine was only beginning to imagine. "Enter," he said without raising his eyes, as if he had sensed her presence. Katherine crossed the threshold, softly closing the door behind her. The click of the lock echoed through the environment like a seal of confession. "Forgive me if I interrupt," she said, approaching the table. "You interrupt nothing crucial," replied William, finally raising his gaze. "Just tide and wind calculations." She observed the scattered maps. noting the meticulous annotations in his angular handwriting, the symbols marking marine currents and sandbanks. There was something hypnotizing about the precision of his work, the way his fingers traced routes as if caressing a lover's skin. "William," she said, her voice coming out softer than intended, "I need to ask you a question." He put down his quill and leaned back in the oak chair, studying her with those grey eyes that seemed to see through souls. "Ask." Katherine took a deep breath, gathering courage for the words that could change everything between them. "Are you the man that Lady Beatrice described?" The silence that followed was dense as black velvet. William didn't blink, didn't move, only observed her with an intensity that made Katherine feel naked before him. "What did she tell you? That Lady Anne was a Spanish spy, that you protected her even knowing of her treason, that your marriage to me was just a facade to hide your own guilt." The words came in a rush, like repressed water finally finding a crack in the dam. William leaned back in his chair, hands intertwined over his chest in a pose that suggested resignation more than surprise. "And what do you believe?" "I want to believe there is more truth in this story than Beatrice revealed," responded Katherine. "I want to believe the man I married is not the traitor she painted." William rose slowly, circling the table until he stood before her. The proximity made Katherine aware of the masculine scent emanating from him, leather, sandalwood, and something indefinably his own that made her heart race. "And if I told you she spoke the truth?" he asked, his voice low as a murmured confession. "That I protected a traitor for love? That I lied to my queen and stained my honor?" "Then I would ask why," responded Katherine without hesitation. William's eyes softened as if something within him had surrendered. "Because when we truly love someone," he said, raising his hand to lightly touch her face, "we make choices the world may judge as madness." The touch of his fingers on her skin was like a spark igniting dry paper. Katherine felt herself leaning toward him, attracted by a force more powerful than gravity. "Anne wasn't the master spy that Beatrice described," continued William, his voice gaining a tone of ancient pain. "She was a lonely and naive woman who let herself be seduced by promises of adventure and romance. When I discovered her letters, she was already deeply involved, but without truly understanding the consequences of her acts. And you protected her." "I tried to save her," he said, his eyes never wavering from hers. "I forged evidence of her innocence, diverted investigations, paid bribes. For 2 years I lived on a razor's edge, knowing that at any moment I could be discovered. And the price you paid? My reputation at court, my position of trust with the Queen, my peace of mind." He hesitated. "And when Anne died, when fevers took her before I could save her completely, I paid with my ability to trust in love." Katherine raised her hand, covering his that still rested on her face. "And why are you telling me this now?" "Because," William struggled with the words as if revealing his soul's greatest secret, "because I'm beginning to realize that perhaps love can flourish even in duty's most arid soils." The confession hung between them like the perfume of rare flowers. Katherine saw in his eyes not the cold man she had met at the altar, but someone wounded who had learned to protect himself with ice armor. "William," she whispered. "Katherine," he replied, moving closer until their breaths mingled. The kiss, when it finally happened, was desperate as thirst being quenched, soft as silk running through fingers, deep as wells touching underground waters. His lips found hers with a need that spoke of years of solitude, lonely nights, a heart that had forgotten how to love. Katherine felt herself melting like wax before fire, all her defenses crumbling before the unexpected tenderness of this man who had learned to hide his humanity. When they separated, both were breathing as if they had run a great distance. "This complicates everything," murmured William, resting his forehead against hers. "Or perhaps it simplifies," responded Katherine, smiling for the first time in weeks. Outside, the rain continued its symphony against the windows, but inside the office, something new had been born between two souls who had found each other in the most unlikely place, a loveless marriage that was learning to love. Terse, but would this newly discovered love be strong enough to resist the storms that were approaching? The letter arrived with the morning mail, brought by a messenger with a somber face who disappeared into April's mists before any questions could be asked. Katherine immediately recognized the thick yellowed paper, the black wax seal that had dripped like tears of mourning onto the parchment. There was no coat of arms, No signature, only words that cut her heart like sharp blades. Lady Katherine Ashford, your father, Sir Thomas Fairfax, has been under our protection since the new moon. His safety depends entirely on your cooperation and silence. We await instructions about payment for his freedom. Do not involve the authorities if you value his life. A concerned friend. Catherine's hands trembled so much that the letter almost slipped from her fingers. The world around her seemed to tilt, the morning salon's walls undulating like reflections in disturbed water. Her father, that gentle man who smelled of book ink and sheep's wool, was in kidnappers' hands. William found her thus, pale as altar linen, the letter fallen at her feet like a dry leaf. He had entered for morning breakfast, wearing his dark green hunting doublet, boots still bringing the aroma of damp earth from the gardens, but all his composure disappeared upon seeing her state. "Katherine, what happened?" She pointed to the letter without being able to speak. William picked up the paper, read quickly, and his face transformed into a mask of controlled fury she had never seen before. "Damn them," he murmured, crumpling the letter between his fists. They knew exactly when to attack. "Who?" Katherine finally managed to articulate. "Who would do such a thing?" William went to the window, observing the gardens as if expecting to see enemies emerging from the rose bushes. "The same ones who have been blackmailing me all these years," he said, his voice loaded with ancient rage. "Spanish agents who know my secrets and use them as chains." Katherine felt the world spinning faster. "They know... about Lady Anne?" "They know everything," confirmed William, turning toward her. "And now they're using your father as a pawn in a much larger game." He knelt before her, taking her hands between his. For the first time since they had met, Katherine saw true fear in his grey eyes. "Katherine, listen to me carefully. These men are not simple criminals. They are trained agents of King Philip, operating on English soil with orders to destabilize our preparation against the Spanish Armada. Your father is just an instrument to reach me. Then what will we do?" William rose, beginning to pace like a caged animal. "They expect me to resort to official channels, to expose my own guilt to save Sir Thomas, or to pay with more naval information, as I have been doing secretly all these years. And you won't do that?" He stopped before her, his face grave as a tomb. "I will do something they don't expect," he said. "I will act outside official protocols. I will use my own contacts, my own resources. But this could cost you your position at court." "Damn my position," said William with a vehemence that surprised her. "I won't lose another loved one to these parasites." That afternoon, Katherine observed a transformation in William that showed her completely new facets of his personality. The aristocratic lord disappeared, giving way to a man of action who moved with military precision. He secretly summoned old companions from the Royal Navy, men with faces marked by salt and wind, who arrived at the manor like shadows at dusk. "Marcus Whitfield," William introduced a tall man with greying hair and a scar crossing his left face. "My former second-in-command on Her Majesty's ships." "Lady Katherine," said Marcus, making a respectful bow, "I regret the circumstances of our meeting. And this is James Crawford," continued William, indicating a younger man with penetrating blue eyes and sailor's calloused hands, specialist in discreet operations. For hours they met in William's office, studying maps of London, tracing escape routes, planning an operation that seemed taken from adventure novels. Katherine watched fascinated, as William naturally assumed command, his authority unquestionable even outside official protocols. "We discovered they're keeping Sir Thomas in a warehouse near Wapping Docks," reported James. 3 guards, maybe 4. Professionals, but not impossible." "When will we attack?" asked William. "Tomorrow, before dawn. The tide will be low, facilitating our approach by river." Katherine rose abruptly. "You will take me with you." "Absolutely not," said William. "It's too dangerous." "He's my father," she replied, her voice gaining a firmness that surprised all present. "And if something goes wrong, perhaps my presence could make a difference." Marcus and James exchanged glances with William. There was something in Katherine's tone, an iron determination that reminded them of Viking women from ancient legends. "She's right," said Marcus finally. "If things get complicated, Sir Thomas might respond better to his daughter's voice." William fought with himself, the protector battling the strategist. "Very well," he said finally, "but you'll stay in the boat until you receive orders to the contrary." Katherine nodded, but inside knew she would do whatever was necessary to save her father, even if it meant disobeying William. That night, she remained awake, observing the moon through her chamber's window. Tomorrow, before the sun rose, she would depart on a mission that could cost all their lives, but for the first time since arriving at Ashford Manor, she felt truly alive. Would their newly discovered courage be enough to face the dangers awaiting them in London's shadowy docks? The private council chamber of Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, was a theatre where the most important dramas of the realm were enacted. Its English oak walls, polished by centuries of conspiracies and decisions that shaped history, reflected the trembling candlelight like silent witnesses to state secrets. Tapestries embroidered with the royal coat of arms, golden lions on a red field, hung majestically over the high-backed chairs where sat the most powerful men in England. Katherine entered the chamber like a condemned woman walking to the scaffold. Her black silk dress, chosen by William as a symbol of mourning for lost honor, whispered against the polished marble floor with each hesitant step. Her gloved hands trembled imperceptibly at her sides, but she kept her chin raised in a demonstration of dignity that surprised even her accusers. Sir Thomas's rescue had been successful 3 weeks earlier. In an operation worthy of Elizabethan corsairs, William and his men liberated Katherine's father from Wapping's shadowy docks, but the price of this victory had been greater than anyone had imagined. Lady Beatrice Pemberton, driven by jealousy and thirst for revenge, had taken advantage of William's absence from court to sow her poisonous seeds in the right ears. Now, before the Queen's private council, Katherine faced formal accusations of collaboration with Spanish Catholic agents. Lord Cecil, Her Majesty's Secretary of State, presided over the session with his austere presence. His small, penetrating eyes studied Katherine like an entomologist examining a rare insect. To his right, Lord Walsingham, the Queen's feared spy master, leafed through documents with fingers that had already signed death sentences for dozens of traitors. Lady Katherine Ashford, Cecil's voice echoed through the chamber like a funeral bell, you have been accused of maintaining secret correspondence with agents of hostile foreign power. How do you respond to these accusations? I am innocent, my lord, responded Katherine, her voice clear as crystal despite the terror she felt. I have never betrayed my homeland or my queen. Lady Beatrice, seated among the witnesses, smiled like a cat that had just caught a canary. Her golden brocade dress gleamed like a victorious warrior's armor. Lord Cecil, she said, rising gracefully, I possess evidence that contradicts the accused's words. She approached the central table and deposited a leather folder that Katherine recognized with growing horror. They were Lady Anne's letters that Beatrice had shown in her house. These correspondences, continued Beatrice, her voice melodious as a siren's song, were found among Lady Katherine's personal belongings. They clearly demonstrate a pattern of communication with Spanish emissaries. Katherine felt the ground disappearing beneath her feet. The letters had been planted, obviously, but how could she prove it? They are forgeries, she protested. Or they were placed among my belongings without my knowledge. A grave accusation, said Lord Walsingham, raising one of the letters. Are you accusing a lady of nobility of forging evidence? Before Katherine could respond, the chamber doors opened with a crash. William Ashford entered like a storm over dry land, his black cloak fluttering behind him like an avenging angel's wings. He had ridden without stop from Portsmouth, where he supervised naval preparations, upon receiving news of the trial. Lord Cecil, he said, approaching the table with decided steps, I request permission to speak in defense of my wife. Lord Ashford, responded Cecil coldly, your presence was not requested in this proceeding. Perhaps not, replied William, fixing his eyes on Lady Beatrice with an intensity that made her step back. But I have relevant information about the accusations. A murmur ran through the chamber. Walsingham leaned forward, interested. What information? William took a deep breath, and Katherine saw in that moment that he was about to sacrifice everything for her. The letters presented as evidence against my wife, he said, his voice loaded with ancient sadness, belong to my first wife, Lady Anne Ashford. The silence that followed was deafening. Lady Beatrice paled, as if she had seen a ghost. Impossible, she murmured. Not only possible, but true, continued William, removing documents from his own coat. I have here confessions written by Anne herself, acknowledging her errors and implicating only herself in any illicit correspondence. He extended the papers to Cecil, who examined them with growing interest. "For years," continued William, his voice gaining volume, "I carried the weight of guilt for not having been able to save my first wife from her own foolish choices. I allowed that guilt to transform me into a bitter and isolated man. But I will not allow Catherine's innocence to be stained by crimes she never committed." Katherine watched fascinated as William stripped himself of his defences before the realm's most powerful men. He was offering his own reputation on the altar of her honour. "Furthermore," he said, turning to face Lady Beatrice, "I have reasons to believe these evidences were deliberately planted by someone with personal interest in harming my wife." "What audacity!" exclaimed Beatrice. "How dare you?" "How do I dare?" interrupted William, his voice cutting as a blade. "I dare because I love my wife." The words echoed through the chamber like a declaration of war. Katherine felt tears springing to her eyes, not of sadness, but of joy so intense it hurt. "I love her," repeated William even louder, "with all my being. For her, it would be worth losing honour, title, and life. She is the light that brought hope to a soul that had given up on love." Lord Cecil examined the documents presented by William, comparing them with the letters supposedly found in Catherine's chambers. "In light of this new evidence," he said finally, "and considering Lord Ashford's voluntary confession about his first wife's activities, I declare Lady Katherine Ashford innocent of all accusations." Katherine almost collapsed with relief, but William was at her side in an instant, offering her his arm. "However," continued Cecil, his gaze fixed on William, "your confession about withholding information from the Crown regarding Lady Anne's activities requires punishment. You are stripped of your position as Lord Admiral, effective immediately." William bowed his head in solemn acceptance. "I understand, my lord." When they left the chamber, Katherine finally allowed tears to flow. "William," she whispered, "you sacrificed everything for me." He stopped in the marble corridor, bowed and kissed her forehead with a tenderness that spoke of love deeper than oceans. "I sacrificed nothing," he said. "I chose what truly matters." But even in love's triumph, what new challenges awaited them when the Spanish Armada finally appeared on the horizon? The summer of 1588 arrived at Plymouth, laden with tension and sea salt. The waters of the English Channel, normally blue-grey under England's capricious sky, gleamed with an unsettling green that veteran sailors recognized as a storm's omen. In the harbour, dozens of English warships swayed at their moorings like impatient horses before battle, their pointed masts cutting the sky like spears of a naval army. Katherine observed the dock's frantic movement through the small window of the inn where they lodged. Porters ran back and forth carrying gunpowder barrels, flour sacks, and ammunition boxes. The air vibrated with command shouts, rope creaking, and the constant hammering of naval carpenters making last-minute repairs to wooden hulls. 3 weeks had passed since the trial in London. The private counsel, in an irony lost on no one, had summoned William back to royal service. His naval expertise was too valuable to waste at the moment when history's greatest armada approached English coasts. "The Spanish fleet was sighted off Cornwall," said William, entering the room with a sweat-dampened map in his hands. 150 ships, perhaps more. The invincible armada has finally come to collect its promises." Katherine turned from the window, observing her husband with mixed admiration and concern. He had exchanged his aristocratic attire for practical sailor's clothes, leather breeches, coarse linen shirt, and a coat that smelled of tar and adventure. In recent days she had seen a transformation in him. The melancholic lord had disappeared, giving way to the naval commander he had always been at heart. "When will you depart to meet them?" "With the next tide," replied William, spreading the map on the inn's rough oak table. "Lord Howard will command the main fleet, but each captain will have autonomy for tactical manoeuvres." Katherine approached, studying the markings William had made on the map. Red lines indicated approach routes, blue circles marked defensive positions, and small crosses marked dangerous sandbanks and rocks. "And I?" she asked. "Will I remain here awaiting news like a delicate lady?" William raised his eyes from the map, finding in her a determination that made him smile for the first time in days. "I expected you would ask that," he said. "I spoke with the fleet's chief surgeon. They need auxiliaries to care for the wounded. Your skills with medicinal herbs could be very useful." Katherine had learned the secrets of healing plants from her mother during the long months of illness, knowledge that seemed insignificant in aristocratic salons, but could save lives in battle's heat. "I accept," she said without hesitation. "Katherine," William took her hands between his, now calloused from maritime work. "What will happen in the coming days will be terrible. There will be blood, pain, death, men screaming for their mothers while dying far from home. And there will also be courage, sacrifice, and people fighting for everything they love," she replied. "I want to be there, at your side." That afternoon, Katherine found herself on the deck of the flagship Ark Royal, observing final preparations. Sailors climbed the rigging like experienced monkeys, checking sails and moorings. Gunners polished bronze cannons that gleamed like gold under the setting sun. The smell of tar, gunpowder, and human sweat created a unique perfume of naval warfare. William circulated among the men like a Roman general inspecting his legions. Katherine saw how the sailors respected him, not just for the authority he exercised, but for the competence he demonstrated. He knew every rope, every sail, every secret of those wooden ships that were the only barrier between England and Spanish conquest. "Milady," said a harsh voice behind her. Katherine turned to find an elderly man with a greying beard and hands stained by decades of medical work. "Master Hawkins," said William, approaching. "I present my wife, Lady Katherine. She will be your auxiliary in surgical operations." "Welcome to the floating hell, milady," said Hawkins with a sardonic smile. "Let's hope your stomach is stronger than your appearance suggests." Katherine smiled back. "I grew up caring for my mother during months of agony. My stomach has already been tested, Master." Hawkins studied her with new eyes, recognizing something solid behind the aristocratic facade. "Very well. Tomorrow we'll discover what wood you're made of." When night fell over Plymouth, Katherine and William remained on deck observing the ship's lights scattered across the bay like terrestrial constellations. The wind brought scents of salt, tar, and something indefinable that could have been fear or expectation. "Katherine," said William softly, "if something happens to me tomorrow—" "Nothing will happen to you," she interrupted. "I won't allow it." He laughed, a sound that mixed tenderness and melancholy. "My fierce warrior wife," he murmured, kissing her hair. "How could I have been so blind not to see your strength from the first day?" "Perhaps because we both needed time to discover who we really are," she replied, nestling in his arms. Far away beyond the horizon, the Spanish Armada sailed through darkness like a floating city, laden with imperial dreams and conquest ambitions. Tomorrow, when the sun rose over the Channel waters, two nations would meet in a mortal dance that would decide Europe's fate. Would their newly discovered love be strong enough to survive cannon fire and war's chaos? The dawn of July 29, 1588, painted the sky over the English Channel in amber and scarlet tones, as if the heavens themselves sensed the blood that would be spilled in those sacred waters. From the Ark Royal's deck, Katherine watched the horizon where the Spanish Armada had appeared like a forest of masts swaying against the morning mist. 130 ships organized in a crescent moon formation, their white sails inflated by the southwest wind, seemed like giant seagull wings carrying death across the waves. The sound of war drums echoed through the English fleet like collective heartbeats. 66 smaller but more agile ships responded to the call, their crews running across the decks in a mortal ballet of preparation. The air vibrated with command shouts, rope creaking being tensioned, and the metallic noise of cannons being loaded. Katherine had exchanged her silk dress for practical clothes, dark wool skirt, resistant linen blouse, and a leather apron that would protect her from the blood that was to come. Her hair was tied in a severe bun under a white cap, and she carried a cloth bag filled with medicinal herbs, bandages, and improvised surgical instruments. "Milady," called Master Hawkins, approaching with quick steps. "It's time. Prepare your instruments on the lower deck. The first wounded won't be long in coming." William appeared beside her, magnificent in his dark blue naval uniform decorated with golden braids. The tricorn over his brown hair gave him an air of authority that made sailors bow respectfully as he passed. "Katherine," he said, taking her hands, "stay safe. And remember, on ships priority always goes to the wounded who can return to fight." "And you, remember to return to me whole," she replied, briefly kissing his lips. The first cannon thunder echoed over the waters like thunder announcing a storm. The battle had begun. Katherine descended to the lower deck, where Master Hawkins had improvised a field hospital. Wooden tables served as surgical beds, saltwater buckets awaited to wash wounds, and sharp instruments gleamed under the trembling light of oil lanterns. "Remember," said Hawkins, checking his knives and saws, "speed is more important than perfection. A man with an amputated arm can live. A man who bleeds to death while we waste time with delicate sutures cannot." The first wounded arrived, carried by two companions, a young gunner with wood splinters embedded in his chest. His blood flowed across the deckboards like red ink, and his blue eyes were glazed with pain and shock. "Place him here," ordered Katherine, surprising herself with the firmness of her own voice. Working alongside Hawkins, she removed the wood fragments with improvised tweezers, cleaned the wounds with strong wine that burned like fire, and stitched the torn skin with hemp threads. The young man screamed once, then fainted, a small mercy amid the horror. Above, the cannon roar was constant like an eternal storm. The ship swayed violently with each impact, and Katherine learned to work with flexed legs to maintain balance. Her fingers became red with blood, her apron soaked with bodily fluids, but she continued working with iron determination. "Another!" someone shouted, descending, carrying an older sailor. This one had lost his left hand in a gunpowder explosion. Katherine saw Hawkins pick up a saw and understood what needed to be done. Without hesitating, she held the man's arm while the surgeon completed the amputation, then cauterized the stump with red-hot iron. The smell of burned flesh mixed with the odors of gunpowder and blood that already saturated the air. Hours succeeded each other in a blur of pain and urgency. Katherine lost count of how many men passed through her hands. Sailors with broken ribs, gunners with gunpowder burns, soldiers with sword wounds. Some survived, others died whispering names of women and mothers they would never see again. During a pause between waves of wounded, Katherine climbed to the deck to breathe fresh air. The spectacle she found was both terrible and majestic. English and Spanish ships danced among themselves like mortal partners, exchanging cannon broadsides that illuminated the afternoon with golden flashes. Black smoke rose from various hulls like war incense offered to battle gods. William appeared at her side, his face covered with soot, but eyes shining with life. "How are you?" he asked, shouting to be heard over the artillery noise. "Alive," she replied, smiling despite the surrounding horror. "And learning I'm stronger than I imagined." "I always knew," he said, kissing her forehead. "I always saw the warrior who lived behind the delicate lady." At that moment, Katherine understood she was living one of her life's most important moments. Not just the battle that would decide England's fate, but the discovery that true love flourished most intensely in adversity's most arid soils. "William," she said, holding his gunpowder-stained hands, "whatever happens today, I want you to know these last months have been the happiest of my life." "And mine too," he replied. "You taught me that the heart can heal even after the deepest wounds." A new cannon thunder interrupted the moment. William returned to command. Katherine descended again to the improvised hospital, but something had changed between them. A connection forged in battle's fire, tempered by the knowledge that each moment together could be the last. When the sun finally set over the Channel's bloodied waters, the Spanish Armada was in retreat. The winds had changed, favoring the English, and Philip II's ships sailed north like shattered imperial dreams. Katherine and William remained embraced on deck, watching the enemy sails disappear into darkness. Around them, English sailors celebrated victory with hoarse shouts and war songs. But for the couple, the true victory had been discovering that love could survive even naval warfare's hell. With the Spanish threat driven away, what future awaited them in an England forever transformed? The autumn of 1588 painted Ashford Manor's gardens in gold and scarlet tones that mirrored the transformation occurred in its inhabitants' hearts. The centuries-old trees swayed in October's wind, like dancers dressed in colored leaves, whispering renewal secrets to those who knew how to listen. The aroma of ripe apples mixed with the perfume of late roses that insisted on blooming, even with winter's proximity. Katherine walked the gravel paths with different steps from those she had taken the first time she stepped on that soil. They were no longer the hesitant steps of a frightened young woman, but the firm strides of a woman who had discovered her own strength in the Channel's bloody waters. Her hands, which once knew only silk and embroidery, now carried honourable calluses from someone who had saved lives with her own claws. Queen Elizabeth's letter had arrived the previous week, bringing royal pardon for William and his appointment as Knight of the Order of the Garter, an honour recognising his services in defeating the Spanish Armada. He didn't recover his old title of Lord Admiral, but gained something more valuable, the chance to start over with a clean conscience. "Milady," Mrs. Thornton approached, carrying a tray of steaming tea. "Lord William requests your presence in the library." Katherine smiled at the housekeeper, who had become much more than a servant. She was now confidant and friend. During the months of absence in Plymouth, Mrs. Thornton had cared for the property as if it were her own family. How did he seem when he arrived from London? Thoughtful, milady, but not with the melancholy of before, more like a man carrying important plans. Katherine found William in the library, bent over the table where naval maps gave way to architectural plans and legal documents. He had exchanged his military uniform for elegant civilian clothes, dark green velvet doublet and wool breeches that gave him more the air of a rural gentleman than a courtier. "Katherine," he said, rising upon seeing her enter, "I have a proposal that could completely change our lives." She approached, curious, observing the scattered documents. She recognized plans of the manor itself, but with strange modifications: converted rooms, removed walls, new spaces marked as classroom and dormitories. "What is this?" William took her hands between his, grey eyes shining with a light she hadn't seen since before the war. "A school," he said simply. "A school for war orphans, children of dead sailors, artisans' children who lost their parents." Katherine studied the plans with growing fascination. The idea was ingenious. Convert the manor's less-used wings into dormitories and study rooms, maintain the gardens as recreation areas, transform the empty stables into workshops where children would learn useful trades. "William, it's an extraordinary idea, but the costs—" "I have sufficient savings," he interrupted. "And more important, I have a wife who proved capable of healing wounds of body and soul." The words struck her like an accurate arrow. Katherine understood he wasn't just proposing a school, but a new way of living, a purpose that would give meaning to the years they had spent carrying others' guilt. "How many children could we shelter?" "Initially 20, eventually 40 or 50. We would teach not just letters and numbers, but practical trades, carpentry, navigation, herbalism, agriculture." Katherine imagined the manor's silent corridors echoing with children's laughter, the melancholic gardens transformed into improvised playgrounds, the sombre library becoming a study room where young minds would discover the treasures hidden in books. "But what about your reputation at court? Transforming a noble mansion into a school for orphans?" "Damn the court," said William with a vehemence that surprised her. "For years I lived trapped by others' expectations, wearing masks that suffocated me. The war taught me that life is too short to waste on vanity games." He walked to the window overlooking the gardens, contemplating the trees golden by autumn. "Besides," he continued, "we have an example to follow. Your own transformation during battle. The way you discovered your true nature when necessity demanded. William, I want our children, when we have them, to grow up in a house where a person's value is measured by their kindness, not their cradle. I want them to learn that true nobility resides in service to others." Katherine approached him, softly touching his arm. "And if society despises us for this choice?" William turned to face her, a smile touching the corners of his lips. "Then we'll despise society back," he said. "We'll create our own community based on values that truly matter." Katherine observed the architectural plans again, imagining the possibilities. An orphaned child learning to read in the library where she herself had discovered Lady Anne's secrets. Boys learning navigation with a man who had faced the Spanish Armada. Girls discovering the mysteries of medicinal plants with a woman who had saved lives in battle's heat. "There's one condition," she said finally. "What?" "I want us to accept children from all origins, children of merchants, artisans, even children of Catholics who remain loyal to the crown. Education shouldn't have religious or social borders." William smiled, a smile that illuminated his entire face. "That's why I love you," he said, kissing her hands. "For that and 1,000 other reasons." That night, they remained awake until late, planning transformation details. They discussed curriculum, teaching methodologies, financing forms, strategies to deal with the social opposition they would certainly face. When they finally lay down, Katherine heard through the open window the autumn wind whispering among the leaves. But now it wasn't a melancholic sound. It was a promise of renewal, of lives that would be touched and transformed within those centuries-old walls. Would it be possible to transform a house of secrets into a school of hope? 5 years had transformed Ashford Manor into a symphony of young voices echoing through the corridors like celestial music. The May morning sun of 1593 filtered through coloured glass panes, creating dancing rainbows over study tables where 42 children of varied ages bent over books, parchments and learning instruments. The aroma of chalk, fresh ink and freshly baked cookies had forever replaced the melancholic perfume of sleeping memories. Katherine walked among the desks in the main study hall, observing with maternal pride the small, concentrated heads. Thomas, 8 years old, son of a sailor killed in battle against the Armada, traced careful letters on a slate. Mary, a 10-year-old orphan found begging in London streets, recited Shakespeare verses with perfect diction. James, son of a Catholic carpenter who died building ships for the Queen, solved mathematical problems with impressive ease. Lady Katherine, called a melodious voice. She turned to find Sister Margaret, the Franciscan nun who had joined the teaching staff 2 years before. The middle-aged woman, with a kind face marked by smile wrinkles and blue eyes that shone with intelligence, had become indispensable in teaching Latin and philosophy. "Are the children ready for this afternoon's presentation?" asked Katherine. "More than ready," replied Sister Margaret with pride. Robert prepared a celestial navigation demonstration that would impress even Oxford masters. Robert Ashford, 8 years old, was Katherine and William's eldest son. He had inherited his father's passion for the sea and his mother's determination to transform knowledge into practical action. Beside him, his brother Edmund, 6 years old, showed precocious talent for herbalism and natural medicine. The sound of hammers and saws echoed from the outer courtyard, where older students worked in a naval carpentry workshop under Master Crawford's supervision, the same James who had participated in Sir Thomas's rescue years before. Now, with greying hair and even more calloused hands, he taught young orphans to build ship models that truly sailed in the artificial lake created in the gardens. Katherine headed to the library, which had become the school's pulsing heart. The shelves, once guardians of somber secrets, now housed treasures of human knowledge organized for curious young minds. World maps replaced melancholic portraits on the walls, and terrestrial globes spun constantly under fingers, eager to discover new continents. "Mother!" exclaimed Robert, running toward her with a parchment in his hands. "I calculated the fastest route to the East Indies. Look!" Katherine examined the complex mathematical calculations her son had performed, impressed with the precision. At 8 years old, Robert already mastered trigonometry concepts that adult men considered mystical. "Magnificent, my love," she said, kissing his forehead. "Will you show your father when he returns from London?" "Of course." And Edmund discovered a new herb mixture that cures headaches faster than any other remedy. Edmund appeared running, hands dirty with earth and face radiant with satisfaction. He carried a small clay pot containing a plant Katherine didn't recognize. "It's a combination of fennel, chamomile, and an herb I found in the woods," explained the boy, serious as a small professor. "Sister Margaret tested it when she had a migraine yesterday, and the pain passed in minutes." Katherine embraced both sons, feeling her heart overflow with pride and love. They had grown in an atmosphere of learning and service to others, developing not just intelligence, but compassion and sense of purpose. "Milady," a familiar voice interrupted the family moment. Katherine turned to find Mrs. Thornton at the library entrance, a warm smile illuminating her aged but still vibrant face. The housekeeper had transformed as much as the manor, exchanging formal austerity for the joy of someone caring for dozens of children as if they were her own grandchildren. "Lord William has just returned from London," she announced. "And he brings important visitors." Katherine felt a tingle of curiosity mixed with apprehension. Visits to Ashford School had become more frequent in recent months, as the institution's reputation spread through England's educational circles. Some came from academic curiosity, others moved by social skepticism about the Ashfords' strange experiment. "What type of visitors?" Representatives from Cambridge University, milady, and Mrs. Thornton hesitated, as if not knowing how to interpret the information. Lady Beatrice Pemberton. The name fell on Katherine like a drop of cold rain on a sunny day. Beatrice, who had disappeared from London social life after the trial fiasco 5 years before, now resurging like a ghost from the past. Katherine entrusted the children to Sister Margaret's care and headed to the main hall, where she found William conversing animatedly with 3 men in academic attire. He wore his best navy blue doublet, a concession to social conventions he rarely made in the school's informal routine. "Katherine," he said, approaching with a smile that mixed pride and nervousness, "I present Professor Whitmore, Rector of Trinity College, Professor Adams from the Mathematics Department, and Professor Henley, Specialist in Pedagogy." The 3 men bowed respectfully, but Katherine perceived in their eyes the scientific curiosity of those observing an uncommon experiment. "Lady Katherine," said Professor Whitmore, a man with a greying beard and thick-lensed glasses, "your school has caused considerable interest in academic circles." "What type of interest?" asked Katherine, maintaining a polite but vigilant tone. "Skeptics and admirers in equal measure," replied Professor Adams. "Some consider your methodology revolutionary, others see it as dangerous subversion of natural order. And you? What opinion do you bring?" Professor Henley, the youngest of the 3, inclined slightly. "We came to see for ourselves. The orphan children you've educated have surprised private tutors in London with knowledge that would rival young aristocrats from traditional families." Before Katherine could respond, a familiar figure appeared at the main entrance. Lady Beatrice Pemberton, now with some silver threads among her red hair and deeper lines around her eyes, entered like an actress making a dramatic stage appearance. She wore a burgundy velvet dress, elegant but discreet, very different from the extravagant attire she used to wear at court. There was something changed in her posture, less arrogance and more humility. Katherine couldn't completely decipher the transformation. "Katherine," said Beatrice, approaching with hesitant steps, "thank you for receiving me." "Lady Beatrice," replied Katherine, maintaining formal courtesy, "what brings you to our school?" "Repentance," said Beatrice simply, the words sounding like a murmured confession, "and a proposal that may interest you." William exchanged glances with Katherine, both equally surprised by the change in their former antagonist. "But first," continued Beatrice, "I would like to see what you've built here. The stories reaching London are impressive." Katherine decided to accept the situation as it presented itself. She guided the group through the transformed corridors, showing the classrooms where children of diverse origins learned together, the workshops where young orphans developed practical skills, the gardens where medicinal herbs grew alongside ornamental flowers. In the navigation room, Robert demonstrated his maritime route calculations to the Cambridge professors, who exchanged glances of genuine surprise. In the carpentry workshop, Edmund explained the medicinal properties of different plants with terminology that impressed even the most skeptical academics. "Extraordinary," murmured Professor Whitmore, observing a 12-year-old girl solve algebra problems on the blackboard. "This child, where did she come from?" "From Southwark streets," replied Katherine. "We found her living on alms 3 years ago. We discovered she possessed a brilliant mind, needing only opportunity to flourish." During lunch, served in the former banquet hall, transformed into a community refectory, Lady Beatrice remained silent, observing interactions between educators and students. Katherine noticed discreet tears in the eyes of the woman who had once been her greatest enemy. "Lady Beatrice," said Katherine when they found themselves alone in the rose garden, "what repentance brought you here?" Beatrice walked to a stone bench under a pergola covered with climbing roses. She sat heavily, as if carrying invisible burdens. "After the trial, after my lies were exposed, I was banished from court," she began, her voice laden with sadness. "I spent 5 years in exile in Cornwall, on a rural property I inherited from my grandmother." Katherine sat beside her, waiting. "During that time, I met orphaned children from the region, children of fishermen, miners, small human beings wasting their lives for lack of opportunities." Beatrice raised her eyes, meeting Katherine's. "I began teaching some of them to read, informally. I discovered something I had never imagined, the joy of seeing a young mind discover the world through books. "And what proposal do you bring?" "I want to establish a similar school in Cornwall," said Beatrice, "using your methods, your philosophy. But I need guidance, forgiveness, a second chance to do something truly important with my life." Katherine studied the face of the woman who had been her antagonist. She saw sincerity where once there had been malice, humility where once there had been arrogance. "Why should I trust you?" "Because we both learned that true redemption only comes through service to others," replied Beatrice, "and because I deeply envy what you've built here with William. The true love, the shared purpose, the family you've created not just between yourselves but with all these children." That afternoon, the Cambridge professors met with William and Katherine in the office that no longer housed war maps, but educational projects and correspondence with other teaching institutions. "Lady Katherine, Lord William," said Professor Whitmore solemnly, "Cambridge would like to propose a formal partnership with your school." "What type of partnership?" "Establish Ashford School as an official preparatory institution for the university," explained Professor Adams. "Your pedagogical methods could be studied, refined, and replicated in other regions of England." Katherine felt her heart race. It was the official recognition she had never dared dream. "Are there conditions?" asked William. "Only one," said Professor Henley. "We want you to continue exactly as you are. Don't change your inclusive philosophy, your innovative methods, your dedication to marginalized children. Cambridge needs to learn from you, not teach you." That night, after the visitors departed and the children retired to their dormitories, Katherine and William walked through the gardens illuminated by the full moon. The perfumes of jasmine and night roses created an atmosphere of eternal romance, but it was a romance tempered by experience, matured by adversity. "Can you believe what we've achieved?" asked William, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Sometimes it seems like a dream," replied Katherine. A frightened young woman who arrived here 6 years ago would never have imagined she would become an educator, mother, and happy. They stopped before the fountain William had installed in the main garden center. The water danced under moonlight like liquid diamonds, creating soft music that harmonized with the nightingale's nocturnal song. "Katherine," said William, turning to face her, "there's something I've never told you adequately." "What?" "That I love you, not only for what you've become, but for what you helped me become." He lightly touched her face. "Before you, I was a man dead inside, carrying guilt that consumed me. You taught me that the past can be redeemed through present actions." Katherine felt tears touching her eyes, tears of pure joy. "And you taught me that true strength doesn't reside in accepting fate, but in molding it with our own hands," she replied. They kissed under the starlight, surrounded by the perfumes of gardens that had become a playground for happy children. In the distance from the manor's windows, soft lights illuminated the dormitories, where 42 small souls dreamed of bright futures they had never imagined possible. "Mother! Father!" young voices interrupted the romantic moment. Robert and Edmund ran toward them, followed by Mary and Thomas, all in nightgowns and bare feet. "We couldn't sleep," said Robert. "Sister Margaret told us that important men came to see our school today." "Is it true we'll go to Cambridge someday?" asked Mary, her eyes shining with hope. William knelt, embracing the 4 youngsters. "If that's what you desire and work to deserve, yes," he said. "But remember, true success isn't measured by the titles we conquer, but by the lives we touch." "Like you did with us?" asked Thomas, the boy who had arrived traumatized by war and now smiled constantly. "Exactly," replied Katherine, joining the collective embrace. "And like you'll do with others when your time comes to teach and care." When the children finally returned to their beds, Katherine and William remained in the garden, observing the constellations that had witnessed the entire transformation journey. "William," she said softly, "do you remember my mother's medallion? What it said about duty and love?" Katherine smiled, touching the small jewel she now always wore around her neck. "What is born of duty can flourish into true love," she recited. "My mother was right. Our marriage began as a golden prison, but transformed into a garden where flowers of all colors grow." "And what beautiful flowers have grown," murmured William, observing the manor's illuminated windows. "Not just our children, but all these children who found family where they least expected." Years later, historians would write about Ashford School as a revolutionary landmark in English education. They would speak of innovative pedagogical methods, pioneering social inclusion, students who became navigators, doctors, teachers, and leaders in their communities. But Katherine and William knew the true story was simpler and more beautiful than any academic record could capture. It was the story of two wounded hearts who found each other in a time of storms, learned to love despite their scars, and discovered that true love multiplies when shared with others. Epilogue: The legacy of love. In the end, we learned that the greatest treasures are not those we inherit, but those we create with our own hands and offer to the world. Love, when planted in fertile soil of service to others, bears fruits that nourish generations yet to come. From the memoirs of Lady Katherine Ashford, written in 1610, preserved in the archives of what would become the Ashford Educational Foundation, still operating today in rural England, continuing to transform orphan children into leaders, dreamers, and builders of a better world. I thank you for accompanying us on this journey through the storms and calms of the human heart. Remember to subscribe to our channel and leave your like if this story touched your soul. Love, like the seeds we plant, always finds a way to flourish, even in the most unlikely soils.